I remember when I was younger, when I was in elementary school to middle school, I would always watch the news with my parents before going to bed at night and before going to school in the morning. On the news, I would constantly hear about stabbings, homicides, shootouts, robbery and assault, or theft, and it always made me very sad and frustrated. I was scared that one day it could probably be me or a loved one getting shot, stabbed, or assaulted. I wasn't too worried though because I lived in a safe community. Then one day when I was watching the news, I remember hearing about mass shootings at school. This really affected me since I realized that this can happen anywhere at any given time. I remember I would always play out in my head what I would do at school if there was a mass shooting. I would find my brother, go to the kitchen, take the knives, and escape out of one of the rescue windows where I can run to the parking lot and find a car that I can hotwire. I told my brother this and we made it a plan if it ever happened. As I got older and as I saw more gun-related violence on the news, I would constantly ask myself, when am I next? When am I going to be the next person whose life is tragically taken by a gun only to be forgotten until the next victim? But I think the question that is even more important than that is, when is this going to change? Before I can answer that question, I need to paint a small yet broad picture for everyone. The most common gun used in mass shootings is the AR-15. It has been used to commit the attacks in Sandy Hook Elementary in Connecticut, the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, the shootings in Las Vegas, and the school shooting in Parkland, Florida, just to name a few of the many mass shootings that has gone on in recent years in the US. The AR-15 can be manipulated to mimic military-grade guns by adding attachments to it. These attachments make the gun a very desirable weapon for killers to use because it can kill so many people. The craziest part is that these attachments are easily accessible to anyone in the US. Why would these attachments be so easy for anyone in the US to buy? Why would someone even need a military-grade gun? Even crazier than that is that these mass shootings, in which I mentioned a few of them, were only mass shootings that were carried out with only the AR-15. There are many other mass shootings that are carried out with different weapons. Not to mention that mass shootings are only one of the many gun violences that go on in America. There are so many avenues of gun violence, and there are so many different guns on the market that are easily accessible to people, yet there's nothing being done to alleviate gun violence. We are kicking the can down the road. People are getting shot every day, and there has still yet to be a solution to the problem because the government is not addressing it. Why isn't the government doing anything about gun control? Before I answer that question, I think it's important to further understand how big of a problem gun violence is and why gun reform is needed. Recent studies showed that about 80% of all firearm deaths worldwide occurred in the United States. As far as the different types of gun violences that are happening in this country, a few big ones are homicide, suicide, domestic violence, mass shootings, and robbery and assault. According to data from the nonprofit Gun Violence Archive, at the end of 2019, there were 417 mass shootings. There are more mass shootings than days in a year. However, mass shootings only account for a small percentage of gun deaths each year. With this data, it is basically telling us that mass shootings are the least of our problems, although mass shootings are happening every day. The most lethal gun violence, which is suicide, makes up 2/3 of all gun-related deaths, with an average of 63 deaths each day. And in 2019, there were at least 15,292 gun-related homicides, resulting in about 41 deaths each day. The other gun violences I mentioned are all in between the death rates of mass shootings and suicide. Although these are very different scenarios of gun violence with different motives of taking a life, all types of gun violence can all be prevented in the same ways. The ideal solution to gun violence can be solved in 5 big ways. The first way gun violence can be solved is by banning the attachments that can be put on an assault rifle. Like I said earlier, these attachments can be put on rifles in order to mimic military-grade rifles. If these attachments are banned, it would make it harder for killers or mass shooters to kill a mass amount of people in a short amount of time. The second way gun violence can be solved is through laws that gun owners need to know how to properly handle a gun. People who are not thoroughly trained on how to properly handle a gun will end up hurting either themselves or other people. An overlooked way that they can end up hurting people is by leaving it out in the open or by not keeping the gun in a isolated, safe, secure place. For example, a person would probably leave a gun somewhere out in the open. If someone comes across that gun, they can take it and use it to potentially hurt others, especially if a family member is mentally ill or is a criminal. The third way gun violence can be solved is through universal background checks and psychology exams. If there are universal background checks and psychology exams, existing criminals and mentally ill people won't be able to obtain a gun. This will effectively limit gun violence since criminals and mentally ill people won't be able to inflict violence on others with guns. This will also effectively eliminate the mentally ill from committing suicide through gun violence. Furthermore, background checks of the potential gun owner can help to identify if there is a criminal or mentally ill person in the family. With this information, the gun owner will be able to be conscious of how he or she handles the gun at home. Research shows that keeping a firearm at home increases the risk of homicide by a factor of 3, and that more guns lead to more suicides. If the person knows how to handle a gun and keep it in an isolated, safe place, gun violence will decrease. The fourth way gun violence can be solved is by having uniform gun laws throughout the US. Considering that gun reform takes place, if there are uniform gun laws, every state would have the same consistent procedure in obtaining a gun, which means that the license would be legitimate. In 36 of the 50 states in America, there is no legal requirement for gun registration, no gun permit needed, and no gun license necessary to purchase and own a firearm, which means that anyone in the US can buy a gun, even if they don't have the best intentions. If gun laws are consistent throughout the US, this will ensure that every gun owner is legitimate. The fifth way gun violence can be solved is by fixing modern policing. There are many police officers who are racist or even become a cop to become a criminal. If psychology exams or simulations are done, this can weed out any of the police officers who pose a threat to society. To add on to that, the education that these police officers receive should be better in order to approach certain situations differently. For example, a Cleveland police officer shot and killed a 12-year-old boy named Tamir Rice because he was playing with a toy gun in a park. Although the kid pointed a toy gun that was painted black at the police officer, if the police officer was able to survey the area better rather than just pull up and shoot the kid, the outcome would have been different, and maybe Tamir Rice would still be living today. Although these ideas can help reduce gun violence in America, these solutions won't fix themselves because there's a bigger problem. Many people here in America think that the issue of gun control is something that can be easily fixed. However, gun control is a tough topic to be solved since there are many obstacles in the way. To answer the question I posed before about why the government hasn't done anything about gun violence is because politicians are lobbied by gun manufacturers, which means that they don't want gun reform because gun reform would make it harder to buy guns, which would ultimately lose money for the gun manufacturers. For example, if there were background checks, these background checks would decrease profit in two big ways. Background checks would be able to identify mentally ill people and criminals. Because of this information, they won't give the guns to them and sales would go down. And the second way is that without criminals and mentally ill people posing a threat to society, this would decrease the demand for people to own guns for self-protection, therefore cutting off more sales. These gun manufacturers are not protecting the people of America. They are doing whatever they can possibly do so they can get as much profit as they possibly can. They care more about money than people's lives. Moreover, there has been controversy that the Second Amendment conflicts with gun control. However, they can coexist. The Second Amendment says that we have a right to bear arms because it is necessary to the security of a free state. Simply put, people can own guns because it is necessary for self-protection. However, not all people who own guns have that same motive. Long story short, there is not a simple answer to the problem of gun violence in this country. After much thought about what we can do to not become victims of gun violence, I came up with one simple thing we can do to save ourselves. All we have to do is be proactive. One way we can be proactive is by developing a run, hide, fight mentality, which will help you already make a decision so that when a crisis hits, all you have to do is act. If you can identify your surroundings, such as entrances, exits, windows, planters, walls, or pillars, this information can help you know what to do if an active shooter walks through that door. By identifying exits, entrances, and windows, you can have a plan as to where you will run. By identifying planters, pillars, and walls, you can use that as possible cover from bullets. With that being said, we need to be proactive not just in the moment of a shooting, but actively in peaceful protests and by writing to and supporting those in power who can make change possible. We need to be serious about voting in politicians who are committed to gun reform and who are willing to change the laws. Only when we choose people to run the government who put lives before guns will our country become safer. Think about it like this. We are all just waiting for the next victim to get shot. It could be you, it could be your mother, it could be your friend, it could be your grandfather, it could be your brother, heck, it could be your whole family. But the fact of the matter is that it can happen anywhere, at any time, by any person. And the sad reality is that it could have been prevented. But the constant inaction of gun reform by the government will only lead to more gun-related deaths. And without knowing it, we are all playing a waiting game. We see the gun violence that goes on in America every day on the news in front of our faces, like we are just waiting for it to happen to us. So this leaves us all with one question. When will it be me? Thank you.